when trying to post anonymously in any form. Okay, so what is authorship recognition? In this talk, I'm actually going to be using two terms interchangeably, which is authorship recognition and stylometry. Stylometry is actually a form of authorship recognition that deals specifically with the linguistic style of the text. We're not talking about handwriting. We're not talking about contextual clues like when something was posted or the content of it. We're simply talking about the syntactic structure of the text, such as word length, letter distribution, punctuation usage, and various linguistic measurements. To give a brief history on what stylometry has been, the first major problem that stylometry dealt with was looking at the Federalist Papers, which were 85 papers published in New York in the late 1700s to try and persuade the people of New York to ratify the Constitution. Now, these papers were published anonymously, but we knew through historical records that most of them were actually authored by either James Madison or Hamilton, and 12 of these had completely disputed authorship. They did not know who wrote them. So stylometry was used to show that Madison actually authored these documents, and this data set has been used for countless stylometry studies to show new methods and things like that. Modern stylometry, that was mostly done originally using various statistical techniques, but modern stylometry has its roots in machine learning, using classifiers such as support vector machines, genetic algorithms, neural networks, and various other artificial intelligence techniques. I'll go over a little bit later on the lecture about what machine learning is for anyone who's unfamiliar. But these techniques are used extensively, and it's been a very strong point of success for AI because these techniques have been very successful in general. Oops. So why is stylometry important? It's great that you can figure out who authored a 200-year-old document, but how does it apply to the world today? Well, here's a quote from the Institute for Linguistic Evidence, and it kind of explains the importance of stylometry in things like forensics, in terms of plagiarism. Stylometry is used often in court cases, trying to figure out who wrote something, who authored some sort of document that could relate to the guilt or innocence of someone on trial. And also, it's become an important part of anonymity through some of this research. Can stylometry be used to remove to de-anonymize a document, to try and harm anonymity in some way? So what is this threat to privacy that stylometry can pose? Now, there are good techniques for location-based privacy. If you want to post something anonymously, you can use Tor, you can use a pseudonym, you can do all sorts of things so you can't trace back to where the document or was posted from on the internet, things like that. But that may not be enough. Stylometry can be used to identify authors based on their writing style, no matter what methods of location-based anonymity they took to try and publish a document anonymously. So our question is, can anonymous authors defend against this? Now, there has been some previous work in this area. There's a paper back at the Usenix security meeting in 2000 by a couple of authors that found that it takes about 6,500 words to accurately define someone's writing style. They did a whole bunch of experiments and found that the mark where it kind of doesn't really get much better after that was 6,500 words. Now, that seems like a lot, but later research has shown that it can get even smaller amounts of words can provide a fairly stable background for someone's writing style. There's also an article written a couple years ago called The Multidisciplinary Requirement for Privacy, written by Carlisle Adams. He talks about the need for anonymity being a field that takes in multiple disciplines, not just technical, not just location-based security, but also looking at writing style and things of that nature. So there are two basic methods of stylometry that can be used as a threat to anonymity. The first is supervised stylometry, and this is where you have a set of documents from known authors and a new document of unknown authorship that you're pretty sure comes from one of the authors in this known set. You can train a classifier, which I'll explain what a classifier is later for anyone who's unfamiliar. You can train a classifier to get the writing profiles of the different authors of the known text, and then you can use that information to figure out who authored the unknown text. So here's a scenario. Let's say Alice is an employee of Bob's company, and Bob runs kind of an abusive company. They don't treat their workers very well. They maybe break some laws. So Alice wants to publish a document talking about these abuses. So she publishes this anonymously. She takes great care to do so anonymously, so it can't be traced back to her computer, it can't be traced back to her home. But Bob, say, has lots of writing samples from everyone in his company, from reports that they've written, from their applications, things like that. He might only have a company of 20 people. He can then look at the writing styles of everyone in that company, compare it to this unknown document that was written about his company, and find out that Alice was in fact the author of it. This is a real threat that could happen, and Alice could be terminated or worse, depending on where this is happening. And this is kind of the basis of supervised stylometry and the threat that supervised stylometry can pose. Unsupervised stylometry is when you have a set of documents that are all of unknown authorship. You don't have any previous author information. This is also known as similarity detection. In this case, you'd be trying to figure out what documents are by the same author, regardless of who that author may be. And here's the scenario in this case. Say you have some sort of anonymous forum and some oppressive government. The participants of this forum might use it to organize protests or spread news, things like that. But there's no real way of knowing how many authors participate in this forum. There's no way of knowing the organizational structure because you can't tell who were leaders, who were not, who's posting messages. You have none of that information. Unsupervised stylometry might be able to be used in order to split up this author set, figure out how many authors there are, and establish some writing profiles for various authors that can then be fed into some sort of supervised stylometry system in order to figure out the actual identity of some of these authors. So while I hope these scenarios present a somewhat clear threat, I want to give some numbers to back it up. Now, the unsupervised case is a bit more difficult. We did take a forum and anonymize all the data, looked at 9 anonymous authors with lots and lots of posts, and only got about 35% accuracy when using just the original data set. We think that this mostly is because the documents are much shorter, and it's harder to distinguish writing style in these shorter documents. So we took 5 of these authors and added a bunch of their posts together to get longer documents, and we're able to, with unsupervised learning techniques, get about 88% accuracy in figuring out what authors wrote which posts. So clearly there's a little bit more work to do here, but there is also other research going on. There are some researchers that wrote this great paper called Write Prints, and if you Google Write Prints, you can find it, who claim to have as high as 95% accuracy looking at unsupervised clustering of 50 authors or more. Now, their problem is defined a little bit differently in the fact that they're looking only at pairing of authors. They were taking just 2 documents from each author and comparing one set to the other to try and link them. So this is a much easier problem than simply looking at an unknown number of authors, an unknown number of posts per author. But still, these are encouraging results that show that the threat is there, and maybe a little more work needs to be done to really solidify the numbers. Supervised stylometry, however, the threat is quite clear. We did some research looking at a 15-subject pool, and this is what most of my talk will be about in a moment. And we found that with 79 to 90% accuracy, you could identify who the author was of a small group of authors. Other researchers, again, the Write Prints folks, found with 50 unique authors, again, they're getting high marks of about 90% accuracy, which is significant. So we used this information to establish a study. We wanted to see if authorship recognition could be attacked, how it could be attacked, and how easily it could be attacked. We decided to do an in-depth study on attacking authorship recognition using a number of subjects. And we came to the conclusion that stylometry is very vulnerable to attack, and also that these attacks can be used in some way to protect privacy. There's some related work in the field of adversarial stylometry, but overall it's not a very well-researched field and hasn't really been looked at in any depth.